It begins not with a shout, but with a silence. A specific kind of silence that falls over a landscape after the metal has cooled and the crows have returned to the trees. It is the silence of things that have been deliberately forgotten. We often believe that history is a straight line, a cumulative gathering of wisdom. But what if it is actually a curation, a careful pruning of the branches we find too ugly to look at? We tell ourselves stories to sleep at night, stories about heroes and justice and the orderly arrangement of the cosmos. But deep in the bedrock of our oldest myths there are fractures. There are gods who do not fit, gods who seem like debris left over from a previous more violent version of the world. So before you get too comfortable in the dark, before you let your eyes close completely, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. Only if you want to walk further into this fog. Tell me where you're listening from and what time the clock shows in your part of the world. Let us anchor ourselves in time before we drift back to a place where time was measured in blood. Consider the mountain, Mount Olympus, rising out of the mist, the pristine citadel of the Greek imagination. The poets tell us it is a place of eternal light, governed by a family of deities who represent the highest ideals of civilization. There is Zeus, the lawgiver, Apollo, the light of reason, Athena, the strategic mind. And yet, sitting at that same table, drinking the same nectar, is a stranger. A figure who is despised by the very family he belongs to. Ares, the god of war. But not the war of generals and maps. That belongs to Athena. Ares is the god of the scream, the severed limb, the madness of the melee. In the Iliad, that foundational text of the Western mind, Zeus looks at his own son and says, "To me, you are the most hateful of all the gods who hold Olympus." Why? Why would a civilization elevate a deity only to despise him? Why keep a seat open for a monster? This is the first crack in the facade. This is the first indication that Ares is not just a character in a story, but a piece of evidence, a remnant of something the Greeks were trying to erase. When we look at the oldest inscriptions, the linear B tablets from the Mycenaean palaces of Knossos and Pylos written centuries before Homer, the name Ares is scarce, almost a ghost. Instead, we find the name Inyalios, a raw, obscure power associated with the chaotic forces of destruction. As the centuries turned and the Greek world collapsed into the Dark Ages, a period of massive depopulation and civilizational reboot, something shifted. When the lights came back on in the Archaic period, Inyalios had been absorbed, or perhaps masked by Ares, but the stain remained. The Greeks, in their pursuit of logic, proportion and democracy, found themselves saddled with a god who represented the total negation of those things. He was not of them. The myths persistently place his home not in the civilized heart of Greece, but in Thrace. To the ancient Greek mind, Thrace was the other, a land of cold winds, tattoos, human sacrifice, and wild horses lying to the north. It was the edge of the known world, the borderland where the rational laws of the city-state dissolved into the primal laws of survival. By calling Ares a Thracian, the Greeks were admitting a terrified truth, that the impulse for destruction comes from outside the city walls, from the wild places, or perhaps they were projecting. Perhaps they exiled their own capacity for violence to the frozen north because they could not bear to admit it lived in their own hearts. There is a theory, whispered in the corridors of comparative mythology, that the Olympian pantheon is a political treaty. It is a forced marriage between the indigenous, earthbound deities of the Mediterranean and the sky gods of the invading Indo-Europeans. In this uneasy truce, Ares represents a friction point. He is often humiliated in the stories, beaten by Athena, wounded by mortals, trapped in jars. It feels like propaganda. It feels like a deliberate attempt by the poets to weaken a force they terrified of. If you tell a story often enough where the monster is foolish and weak, perhaps he ceases to be a monster. Perhaps you can sleep again. But the archaeological record suggests that the Thracian connection might be more than just a literary device. Excavations in the Balkans have revealed cultures that viewed warfare not as a political tool, but as a ritual necessity, a form of communion with the entropy of the universe. In the Varna necropolis, gold is found alongside copper weapons, dating back thousands of years before Agamemnon. There was a worship of iron and blood that predates the marble statues. Ares may be the memory of that older religion, a survival from a time before the civilizing reboot of the Bronze Age collapse. He is the ghost of the world that was destroyed so that Greece could be born. Notice how he has no wife, no stable household in the way Zeus or Hera does. He is transient. He sleeps in the rough. He's associated with the dog and the vulture, scavengers who clean up the mess after the glory has faded. This is not the profile of a king. It is the profile of a biological function. The Greeks tried to dress him in bronze and give him a pedigree, to make him the son of Zeus and Hera, but the fit was never right. The friction remains. He is the embodiment of the uncomfortable fact that civilization is a thin veneer over a chaotic, violent core. And this leads us to a strange silence in the record. If Ares was so hated, so marginalized, why was he essential? Why did the Spartans, the most efficient killing machine of the ancient world, offer sacrifices to Enyalios before battle? They knew something the Athenians tried to ignore. They knew that when the phalanx clashes, when the dust rises and the logic of strategy fails, Athena leaves the field. Athena is the plan. Ares is what happens when the plan fails. He is the reality of the rupture. There is a story, often glossed over, about the children of Ares, not the famous ones, but the dragon, the serpent of Ares that guarded the spring of Ismenios near Thebes. We think of Ares as a soldier, but here, in the deep strata of myth, he is the father of a chthonic monster, a creature of the earth and the underground waters. This links him to the very soil, to the agricultural cycles of life and death. The dragon is not a warrior, it is a guardian of the source. When Cadmus, the Phoenician prince who brought the alphabet to Greece, the very tool of history and memory, arrived to found his city, he had to kill this dragon. He had to kill the child of Ares. It is a symbolic act of immense weight. The new order, the order of writing and walls and laws, killing the old primal guardian of the earth. But the story does not end with the death of the beast. It ends with a command from Athena, the goddess of the new mind. She tells Cadmus to take the teeth of the dead dragon, the teeth of Ares' lineage, and sow them into the ground like wheat. This is where the fog thickens. This is where we must ask, what grows when you plant the teeth of war? We are taught that cities are built on trade and cooperation. But the myth of the dragon's teeth suggests a darker geology. It suggests that the foundation of the city is not stone, but a peculiar kind of harvest. A harvest that requires a bloody sowing. We stand now at the edge of the field, the furrowed earth waiting for the seed. The silence here is heavy, pregnant with a violence that has not yet erupted. We have stepped over the threshold, past the hatred of Zeus and the scorn of the poets, into the soil of Thebes. Something is moving beneath the dirt. The question is not what will grow. We know what grows. The question is, who buried it there? And why does the god of destruction have the power to create a people from nothing but bone and earth? The wind shifts. The scent of iron returns. We must wait and watch the ground break. The dragon is dead. Its coils, iridescent and heavy with the slime of the deep earth, have ceased to undulate. The spring of Ismenios, once guarded by this primal child of Ares, now runs red. Cadmus, the Phoenician prince, the man destined to bring the alphabet to the Greeks, stands over the carcass with a sword in his hand. This is the standard image of heroic triumph, the civilized man slaying the chaotic monster. But history, or what remains of it in the fractured mythology of the Bronze Age, rarely moves in such a straight line. The death of the monster is not the end of the trouble. It is merely the preparation of the soil. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, appears. But her advice is not wise in the way we understand wisdom today. It is alchemical. It is agricultural. She tells Cadmus to perform an act that defies all logic. She tells him to take the teeth of the dragon, the ossified remnants of Ares' own lineage, and sow them into the furrows of the earth as if they were grains of wheat. Pause here. Let the image settle in your mind. A man planting teeth in the mud. In every agricultural society, planting is an act of hope. You bury the seed to get the harvest. You bury the dead to feed the soil. But what exactly are you hoping to grow when you plant the instruments of biting, tearing, and killing? This is the first great paradox of Ares, the connection between the battlefield and the cornfield. We think of war as the opposite of creation, but in the ancient mind, perhaps they were two sides of the same coin. The scythe that harvests the grain and the sword that harvests the enemy are swung with the same motion. Cadmus sows the teeth, and the earth does not yield wheat, It yields iron. The myths describe the scene with a terrifying specificity. First, the tips of spears break the surface of the soil, like strange metallic shoots. Then, the crests of helmets shaking off the dirt. Then shoulders, plated in bronze. Then arms, gripping weapons. An entire army, fully formed, fully armed, rising from the dirt. These are the Spartoi, the sown men. They have no childhood. They have no mothers. They are born from the earth and the violence of the war god, ready to kill from the very first breath. This is a moment of profound civilizational anxiety. It suggests that violence is not learned. It is indigenous to the soil itself. It implies that if you dig deep enough into the earth, you do not find peace. You find dormant armies waiting to resprout. Is this a metaphor for a civilizational reboot? Some theorists suggest that myths like these are memories of a post-apocalyptic recovery. Imagine a world destroyed by a cataclysm, the collapse of the Bronze Age, perhaps, or something older. The survivors, wandering a ruined landscape, might find the teeth of the old world, the weapons, the bunkers, the buried technologies of a warrior caste that had been swallowed by the earth. When these things re-emerge, they seem to spring magically from the ground. The Spartoi do what they were designed to do. Cadmus, terrified by the crop he has raised, throws a stone into their midst. Confused, paranoid, and driven by the blood madness of their grandfather Ares, the warriors turn on each other. A fratricidal slaughter ensues. They hack and slash until the field is silent again, until only 5 remain. These 5 survivors, Ichion, Eudaeus, Chthonius, Hyperenor and Pelorus, do not die. They wipe their blades, they stand amidst the carnage of their brothers, and they make a truce. And here is the detail that should keep you awake. These 5 sown men, these biological machines of Ares, become the nobility of Thebes. They are the ancestors of the ruling families. The greatest city of mythology, the city of Oedipus and Antigone, is not founded on the wisdom of Cadmus alone. It is founded on the survival of the fittest monsters. This challenges everything we want to believe about the civilizing nature of Greek culture. We are told that the polis, the city-state, is a place of law and reason. But the myth of the Spartoi whispers a darker truth, that the foundation of the state is pure, unadulterated violence. The DNA of the city is half alphabet, half dragon, half reason, half Ares. The war god is not an enemy at the gates, he is in the blood of the aristocracy. He is the grandfather of the city itself. Why is this lineage allowed to persist? Why didn't Zeus strike them down? Perhaps because the ancients understood that a city cannot survive on philosophy alone. You need the monster in the basement. You need the Spartoi trait, the capacity for sudden indigenous violence to protect the walls. Ares, the hated god, the exile, is secretly the root system of the polis. But the debt must be paid. Cadmus, the hero, is not celebrated for this act. He is indentured. To atone for killing the dragon, for breaking the original order of Ares, he must serve the war god for a great year, a cycle of 8 solar years. Imagine the creator of the alphabet, the man of letters, forced to serve the god of incoherent screaming for nearly a decade. What did he learn in that silence? What rituals did he perform in the dark to appease the anger of the Thracian god? The texts are silent on the details, but the result is a marriage. At the end of his servitude, Cadmus is given a wife, and not just any wife. He is given Harmonia. And who is Harmonia? She is the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite. The union of war and love produces harmony. And that harmony is wedded to Cadmus, the human king. It seems like a happy ending, a unification of opposites. But look closer at the wedding gifts. There is a necklace. The necklace of Harmonia, made by Hephaestus, the smith god who was cuckolded by Ares. The necklace is beautiful, but it is cursed. It brings tragedy to every woman who wears it. It travels down the generations of Thebes like a radioactive isotope, burning through the royal line, leading to madness, matricide, and civil war. This suggests that the truce with Ares is fragile. You can marry into the family of war, you can try to bind the chaotic force with the laws of marriage and the city, but the curse remains. The metal is still hot. The harmony born of war is an unstable element, prone to radioactive decay. Thebes becomes the stage for the greatest tragedies in human history precisely because it has this dual nature. It is the city of the dragon's teeth. It is the place where the earth remembers the blood. And Ares, though he is rarely seen sitting on a throne in the city, is always there, vibrating in the ground, waiting for the stone to be thrown again, waiting for the children of the earth to turn on one another. But there was a time before the cities, before the sowing of the teeth, when the war god went silent, a time when the screams stopped. There is a strange, isolated fragment of a myth that speaks of a world where Ares was not just hated, but neutralized, completely removed from the board. It is a story of two giants, two boys really, who did what no god could do. They put the god of war in a jar, and they left him there. For 13 months the world was quiet. No swords clashed, no shields broke. The red planet dimmed in the sky. It sounds like a golden age, a return to paradise. But was it? Or was it a terrifying suspension of the laws of reality? What happens to the pressure of the world when the release valve is sealed shut? We must ask ourselves what those 13 months meant, and why, of all the prisons imaginable, the god of blood was held by bronze. The lid is about to be lifted, and the thing inside the jar has been waiting in the dark, hungry for the light. The lid descends. Darkness is total. The air, once thick with the iron scent of blood and the electric charge of the storm, becomes stagnant. We have spoken of the noise of Ares, the clash of the shield, and the scream of the dying, but we have not spoken of his absence. There is a terrifying interlude in the mythology of the Greeks, a gap in the timeline of violence that feels less like peace and more like a held breath. It is a story that Homer mentions almost in passing, a whisper in the 5th book of the Iliad, as if he is afraid that by speaking it too loudly, he might remind the universe of what is possible. He tells us of the time the god of war was put in a jar. It was not Zeus who did this. It was not a counsel of the wise or a decree of fate. It was two boys, Otus and Ephialtes, the Aloidae. They were giants, yes, sons of Poseidon or perhaps born of the earth itself, but they were young, barely 9 years old, yet 9 cubits wide and 9 fathoms tall. They grew like weeds, like cancer cells, expanding with a terrifying, unnatural vitality that threatened to choke the world. They were not interested in the rules of the Olympian order. They wanted to pile Mount Ossa upon Mount Olympus and Mount Pelion upon Ossa, to build a staircase to the sky and drag the gods down. They were the embodiment of a primal vegetative force that knows only growth, ignoring the necessary pruning of death, and to conquer the sky, they knew they had to remove the guardian of destruction. They did not fight Ares. You cannot fight war. To fight him is to feed him. Instead, they bound him. They chained the breaker of shields and stuffed him into a keramos, a bronze jar, a cauldron, a storage vessel, and they hammered the lid shut. For 13 months the god of war sat in the dark. 13 months. The specificity of the number is a key, a jagged tooth in the mechanism of the myth. 13 is a lunar number, the number of moon cycles in a year if you're counting by the old matriarchal calendars before the solar logic of Zeus and Apollo took over. It suggests a reverting of time, a slip back into an older, darker chronology. For a full lunar year and 1 month more the earth was silent. Imagine that world. We often dream of a world without war, we pray for it. But the myth implies something unsettling about this pacifism. With Ares in the jar, the tension of the world had nowhere to go. The Iliad tells us that Ares was perishing inside that vessel. He was wasting away. The god who is immortal was dying. This leads us to a disturbing biological hypothesis about the divine. Ares is not a generator of energy. He is a consumer of it. He requires the friction of human conflict to exist. Locked in the sensory deprivation of the bronze jar, cut off from the psychic feed of human aggression, he began to shrivel. And what of the world outside? The myths are silent, but we can hypothesize. With the Aloidae giants growing unchecked, piling mountain upon mountain, and with the force of destruction locked away, perhaps nature became monstrous. Without the fire to burn the undergrowth, the forest chokes itself. Without the wolf, the herd sickens. The capture of Ares suggests that war, as horrific as it is, acts as a regulator, a great filter that prevents a certain kind of stagnant, suffocating overgrowth. The giants were going to storm heaven not with swords, but with sheer, overwhelming mass. They were going to suffocate the gods. The material of the prison matters. Bronze, chalkios. In the ancient world, bronze was not just a metal for weapons, it was a metal of resonance. But a sealed bronze vessel is an acoustic trap. It silences the scream. It reflects the god's own madness back upon himself. Some archaeologists surmise that this myth is a memory of a specific burial practice. In the Mycenaean world, and earlier in the Minoan, the dead were sometimes placed in large storage jars, pithoi, curled into the fetal position, returned to the ceramic womb of the earth. By putting Ares in a jar, the giants were effectively burying him alive, returning him to the pre-birth state, denying his existence as a discrete entity. The crisis was absolute. The gods were terrified. The machinery of the cosmos was jamming because a necessary gear had been removed. It was not a warrior who saved him. It was not a feat of strength. It was the stepmother of the giants, a woman named Erebor. She went to Hermes, the trickster, the god of thieves and boundaries, and whispered the secret. He is in the jar. Why did she betray her stepsons? Did she fear their ambition? Or did she realize that a world without Ares is a world that has lost its balance? There is a deep, matriarchal pragmatism here, the understanding that the ugly thing must be let out, or the house will collapse. Hermes arrived in the dead of night. He did not smash the jar. He did not engage the giants in combat. He used stealth. He pried open the lid. The text says he stole Ares away. And what he pulled out of that bronze womb was a wreck. The god of war, the insatiable eater of men, was ruined, his strength worn out by the binding. He emerged blinking, emaciated, a shadow of his former fury. This is a profound humiliation. It is the only time an Olympian is brought so close to extinction. It serves as a reminder that the gods are not independent of us. They are tethered to the conditions of our reality. If the vibration of war ceases, the receiver of that vibration ceases to function. The 13 months of silence were a near-death experience for the concept of conflict itself. But the lid was opened. The frequency returned. Ares breathed the air of the upper world again, and the blood returned to his limbs. The giants, Otus and Ephialtes, were eventually destroyed. Not by Ares, but by the arrows of Apollo and the trickery of Artemis. The normal order of death and limitation was restored. The mountains were unstacked. The impossible staircase to heaven collapsed. Yet, the memory of the jar remains. It sits in the back of the collective psyche, a reminder that the god of war is containable, but only for a price. It suggests that there was a time, perhaps a historical era of 13 months, or 13 decades, or 13 centuries, where the martial spirit was suppressed, buried in the storage jars of a culture that prioritized accumulation over conquest. But the seal always breaks, the bronze always corrodes, and when Ares returned, he was changed. He had touched the bottom of his own irrelevance, he had been erased, and he had survived the erasure. The wild, screaming manic energy of the battlefield was still his domain, but as he moved from the archaic age into the classical, a new desire began to form, a desire for legitimacy. He could not just be the butcher in the field, he needed to be woven into the fabric of the city, or he would be thrown into the jar again. He travels now from the wilds of Thrace, from the humiliation of the bronze prison to the very heart of civilization, to a rocky outcrop in Athens that would bear his name forever. He is done with silence. He's about to commit a crime so public, so undeniable, that the gods will have no choice but to invent a new system to deal with him. He's trading the bronze jar for the witness stand. The silence is over. The first trial is about to begin. The jar is left behind in the dust of history, a bad dream from which the god has awakened. But the silence that surrounded him in that bronze prison has changed him. He is no longer just the screaming force of the battlefield, the indiscriminate storm of destruction. He has learned the weight of consequence. We travel now, through the mists of the archaic timeline, to a specific geographic coordinate that you can still visit today. It is a rocky outcrop in Athens, sitting in the shadow of the Acropolis. It is not beautiful. It is rough, slippery and exposed to the elements. It is the Areopagus, the hill of Ares. For thousands of years this rock was the seat of judgment, the high court where men were tried for homicide. But why? Why is the supreme court of the ancient world named after the god of slaughter? Why do we associate the sanctity of law with the deity of chaos? To understand this, we must look at the body lying at the foot of the hill. The story involves a daughter. We rarely think of Ares as a father in the protective sense, but the myths are specific here. He had a daughter named Alcippe. Her name means mighty mare, linking her back to the wild, thundering energy of the Thracian plains. She was washing, or perhaps just walking, near the spring of the Asclepieion, a place where the water meets the rock. There she was ambushed. The attacker was Halirrhothius, a son of Poseidon. The sea god's son, arrogant and fluid, tried to force himself upon the daughter of the war god. It was a violation of the old laws, the deep laws of bodily autonomy that predate the city-state, and Ares saw it. He did not send a plague. He did not petition Zeus. He descended. The text is brutal in its simplicity. Ares killed Halirrhothius on the spot. It was not a battle. It was an execution. The father protecting the child, the predator becoming the prey. In an older world, in the world of the dragon's teeth, this would have been the end of it. Blood pays for blood. But we are at a tipping point in human consciousness here. Poseidon, the father of the victim, discovers the body. He is a powerful god, an elder brother of Zeus. He could have drowned Athens in a tidal wave. He could have started a war that would shatter the tectonic plates. But he does something terrifyingly modern. He demands a trial. This is the rupture. This is the moment the gears of civilization grind into a new alignment. For the first time in the history of the cosmos, a god is accused of murder. Ares, the immortal, is summoned to stand on that rough rock, beneath the night sky, to answer for his actions. The jury is not made of men, but of the 12 Olympians. Imagine the scene. The air is cold. The city below is silent, waiting. On one stone stands Ares, the defendant, radiating the sullen, hot heat of violence. On the other stone stands Poseidon, the prosecutor, smelling of salt and cold fury. And around them the circle of the gods. This is the first murder trial, but it is more than that. It is the moment where the chaotic impulse of revenge is captured and processed by the machinery of law. Why did the Greeks place Ares at the centre of this? Perhaps they understood a profound psychological truth, that the law is not the opposite of violence, but a sublimation of it. The court does not remove the desire to kill, it ritualizes it. By placing the god of war in the dock, the Greeks were acknowledging that justice is at its core a way of managing the Ares impulse in all of us. If even the god of bloodlust can submit to a verdict, then perhaps men can too. But there is a ghost in this courtroom, a presence that has been erased from the popular retelling. Before this rock was called the Areopagus, before Ares ever stood there, it belonged to others. It belonged to the Semnitei, the venerable ones, the Erinyes, the Furies. These were the ancient chthonic goddesses of vengeance who predated the Olympians. They did not need trials. They did not need witnesses. If you spilled kindness blood, they hunted you down. They were the absolute, inescapable consequence of natural law. By holding the trial of Ares on their holy ground, the new patriarchal order of Zeus was performing a hostile takeover. They were replacing the swift emotional justice of the Furies with the slow, deliberative justice of the debate. They were paving over the old matriarchal earth powers with the new masculine logic of the sky gods. Ares, in a strange twist, becomes the agent of this transition. He, the most violent of them all, is used to legitimize the system that suppresses the old vengeance. The verdict is delivered. The gods vote, and Ares is acquitted. The logic is crucial. He killed to save his daughter. It was justified violence. The Ares energy was deemed necessary when it serves the protection of the lineage. This acquittal cemented the function of the Areopagus. It established that not all killing is murder. It introduced nuance into the binary world of life and death. But it also left a stain. The rock was washed with the blood of Halirrhothius. But the tension remained. The Furies were driven underground, into a cave beneath the hill, their power diminished but not destroyed. They listen from below, scratching at the limestone, waiting for the justice of the city to fail. Ares walks free, but he is not the same. He has been processed. He has been named. He is no longer just a force of nature, he is a legal entity. He has a criminal record. The city of Athens has absorbed him, not by worshipping him with love, but by binding him with law. They respect him, but they keep him outside the walls, on that desolate rock. He is the necessary monster, the guard dog that has been obedience trained. Yet, as he leaves the hill, acquitted but alienated, his gaze turns away from the sophistry of Athens. He looks away from the philosophers and the lawyers who used him to build their court. He looks north and east, towards the wild edges of the Black Sea. Because while the Greeks were busy putting him on trial, his bloodline was flourishing elsewhere. He has other children, daughters, women who do not need a father to save them, because they are the ones doing the killing, women who would never submit to a trial by 12 gods. They're riding on the steps, their bows strung, their skin tattooed with the marks of the old pre-legal world. The Greeks call them monsters. The Greeks tell stories of them to frighten their own women into submission, but Ares knows them. They are the only ones who truly carry his face. The law has been established in Athens, but the rebellion is already riding hard from the east. The court is adjourned, but the war is far from over. The daughters of the Black Sea are coming, and they bring with them a history that the poets of Athens will try very, very hard to forget. We leave the stone courtroom of Athens behind. We leave the logic of the lawyers and the cold, salty gaze of Poseidon. We travel now, riding the wind that blows from the northeast, away from the enclosed marble-white cities of the Greeks, towards a horizon that refuses to end. The Greeks loved walls. They loved definitions. They loved to draw a line and say inside is civilization, outside is barbarism. Inside is the man, inside the house is the woman. But Ares, the god who was acquitted but never truly accepted, had a lineage that laughed at these lines. If you travel far enough, past the Hellespont, into the churning waters of the Black Sea, and land on the southern coast near the river Thermodon, you enter a different geometry of existence. This is the edge of the world map for the ancient imagination, and here the daughters of Ares did not weave wool in the inner rooms of a husband's house. They rode. The Amazons. The name itself vibrates with a specific kind of ancient fear. For centuries, scholars and poets told us they were pure myth, a dark fantasy conjured by the Greek patriarchy to serve as a cautionary tale, a nightmare of what happens when the natural order is inverted, when women pick up the spear and rule themselves. They were depicted in art as beautiful but dangerous, a chaos that had to be tamed by heroes like Heracles or Theseus. But the earth, as it often does, remembers what the poets try to forget. In the vast steppes of Eurasia, stretching from the Ukraine to Kazakhstan, archaeologists have opened the kurgans, the great burial mounds of the Scythian cultures, and inside they found the silence of a truth that had been buried for thousands of years. They found skeletons of women, not wives, not servants, women with bowed legs from a lifetime in the saddle, women with arrowheads embedded in their ribs, with combat fractures in their skulls, and beside them, the tools of their trade. Iron swords, daggers, and quivers full of bronze-tipped arrows. These were not myths. These were the daughters of the wind, and in the mythology, they are the daughters of Ares. Why is this lineage so important? Consider the contrast. In Athens, a woman was a minor, a legal non-entity, passed from father to husband. But Ares, the hateful god, the butcher, fathered a society of absolute radical equality and lethal competence. To the Greeks, this was terrifying. To be a daughter of Ares was to be free of the domestic cage. It suggests that the war god, in his wild Thracian aspect, was the patron of a freedom that civilization deemed impossible. There is a specific object that captures this conflict, the belt of Hippolyta. Hippolyta was the queen of the Amazons, a direct child of Ares. The belt she wore was not a piece of jewellery, it was a zoster, a heavy leather war belt used to hold weapons and protect the gut in battle. It was the symbol of her sovereignty, given to her by her father. It represented her right to rule and her right to kill. And what happens? Heracles, the ultimate symbol of Greek masculine strength, is sent to steal it. The ninth labour. He cannot just ask for it. He has to take it. The myth has many variations. Sometimes she gives it willingly, recognizing a kindred spirit, but Hera intervenes, spreading panic, and it ends in slaughter. Heracles kills Hippolyta and strips the belt from her dead body. It is a violent, symbolic act of stripping authority from the feminine. The hero of civilization cannot allow the daughter of Ares to hold the belt of power. It must be taken back to Greece, tamed, and put on display. But the most haunting story is that of Penthesilea. It happens at the very end of the Age of Heroes, beneath the doomed walls of Troy. The city is burning. Hector is dead. The Trojans are broken. And out of the morning mist rides Penthesilea, leading a troop of Amazons to save the city. She is fierce, shining in divine armour, a storm of destruction. She drives the Greeks back to their ships. She is the avatar of her father, Ares, in his purest form, glorious, terrifying, unstoppable. Until she meets Achilles. Achilles is the perfect killer, the cold, efficient termination of life. They fight. It is not a battle of strength, but of fate. Achilles strikes her down, and then the poets give us a moment of silence that rings louder than the clash of bronze. As Penthesilea falls, her helmet slips. Achilles stands over her, his spear wet with her blood, and their eyes meet. In that second, as the light leaves her eyes, Achilles falls in love with her. It is a grotesque, tragic, heartbreaking moment. Tambos, amazement, horror, wonder. He realizes too late that he has destroyed the only being who was his equal, the only one who understood the Song of the Spear as he did. The Greeks kill the thing they fear, and then mourn the beauty of what they have destroyed. Ares, watching from the clouds or the high ridges of Ida, sees his favourite daughter slain by the champion of the West, and he does nothing. This silence of the father is the deepest mystery. Why does Ares not intervene? Perhaps because he knows the cycle. He knows that the Amazons are, like the Spatoi, like the giants, creatures of an older, wilder world that is being systematically erased by the new order of cities and walls. The death of Penthesilea is the death of the wild feminine. It is the final closing of the door on the possibility of a different kind of world. After the Bronze Age collapse, the Amazons fade. They retreat into the fog of the steppe. The Greeks continue to paint them on vases, always depicting them in the moment of defeat, always showing a Greek hero pulling them down by the hair. It becomes a propaganda of control. Look, the pottery says, this is what happens when women fight. We must keep them safe inside. But the connection between Ares and these warrior women suggests a side of the god we rarely see. He is the god of the outcast. He is the god of those who do not fit into the hierarchy of the polis. If you were a runaway, a bandit, an exile, or a woman who refused to weave, Ares was your patron. He offered a terrible, bloody kind of liberation. The wind blows over the kurgans of the Eurasian steppe today. The grass ripples like the muscles of a galloping horse. The gold found in those tombs, the breastplates tailored for female forms, the intricate combs depicting battle scenes, testifies to a reality that was slandered as a myth. The daughters of Ares were real. They lived, they fought, and they died protecting a way of life that refused to bow to the kings of the south. And though they are gone, their bloodline, metaphorically and perhaps literally, seeped into the earth of Europe and Asia. It is a dormant seed, much like the dragon's teeth. It waits. But the story of Ares does not end in the defeat of his children. The Greeks, having killed his daughters and bound his sons, could not get rid of him. They needed him. But they needed to change him. They needed to dilute the blood. They needed to pair the god of war with a force that could soften the iron, that could turn the scream into a song. The next chapter of the mystery takes us from the cold battlefields of the steppe to the heat of the forge and the softness of the bedchamber. It is time to speak of the alchemy of harmony. It is time to speak of the trap that was laid not for death, but for love, and how in the centre of that trap the god of war found his only moment of true peace. The daughters of the steppe are gone, buried under the heavy earth of the kurgans, their history rewritten by the victors, and now we must turn our eyes to the mechanism of that rewriting. We must look at the most famous book in the Western canon, the Iliad. We are taught that this is the supreme epic of heroism, a glorification of the warrior spirit. But if you read it in the quiet of the night, if you listen to the spaces between the hexameters, you begin to suspect that it is something else entirely. It is not just a poem, it is a piece of political propaganda, and its primary target, the victim of its most sophisticated character assassination, is Ares. Consider the strangest moment in the entire Trojan War. The battlefield is a churning sea of bronze and dust. The air is thick with the iron smell of blood. Ares is there, of course. He's fighting on the side of the Trojans, stripping the armour from the dead, covered in gore, a terrifying colossus of destruction. He's doing exactly what a war god should do. He is being the war. And then a mortal man steps forward. Diomedes. A king of Argos, yes, but still a man, a creature of bone and perishable flesh. In any other mythology, in any other reality, a man who challenges a god is instantly vaporized. To look upon the divine in its wrath is to die. But Diomedes does not die. He lunges. He thrusts his spear at the stomach of the god, and the spear bites. It pierces the divine flesh. The god of war screams. Homer tells us that Ares let out a cry as loud as 9,000 or 10,000 men in battle. A sonic boom of pain that shook the armies of both sides, freezing the blood of every soldier on the plain. Ares, the immortal, flees. He ascends to Olympus in a cloud of dark thunder, whining to his father Zeus about the pain. Stop and ask yourself why. Why did the Greeks preserve a story where their god of war is humiliated by a human? Why make him look weak? Why make him a coward who runs away from a scratch? The answer lies in the shadow behind Diomedes. He did not act alone. The text is explicit. The goddess Athena was standing beside him. She wore the helmet of Hades to make herself invisible to Ares. She grabbed the shaft of Diomedes' spear. She added the force. She guided the tip. This is not a fight between a man and a god. It is a civil war between two concepts of violence. It is Athena versus Ares. And to understand the Greek mind, you must understand this rivalry. Athena is also a war deity. She was born from the head of Zeus, fully armoured. But she represents strategy. She represents the general staff, the map, the phalanx, the discipline, the noble war fought for political ends. She is war sanitized by reason. Ares is the opposite. He is the thing itself. He is the panic in the eyes of the dying horse. He is the soldier who breaks rank to butcher the enemy. He is the bloodlust that forgets the objective. He is the reality of war that civilization tries to hide. The Iliad is a massive effort to elevate Athena and suppress Ares. The poets, who were paid by the aristocracy, needed to sell a specific narrative. They needed to tell the kings and the citizens that war was noble, that it was a test of character, that it had rules. To do that, they had to demonize the chaotic, uncontrollable element of battle. They had to make Ares look like a fool. When Ares arrives on Olympus, clutching his wounded belly, the ichor dripping onto the golden floor, he expects sympathy from his father. Instead, Zeus looks at him with cold, terrifying disgust. "Do not sit beside me and whine, you double-faced liar," Zeus says. "To me you are the most hateful of all the gods who hold Olympus. Forever quarrelling is dear to your heart, and wars and battles. This is the official state policy of the Greek world. The king of the gods disowns the god of war. It is a moment of profound hypocrisy. Zeus uses war to maintain his power. He uses violence to enforce his will. But he cannot bear to look at the face of it. He wants the power of violence without the ugliness of it. He wants the victory of Athena without the stench of Ares. This dynamic creates a psychological split in the Western mind that exists to this day. We love the surgical strike. We love the peacekeeping force. We love the hero who kills cleanly for a just cause. That is Athena. We are terrified of the messy, emotional, screaming reality of the slaughter. That is Ares. By humiliating Ares in the Iliad, Homer allows the Greeks to pretend that they are civilized even when they are killing. It is a form of spiritual bypassing. "We are not like that Thracian monster," they say as they wipe the blood from their swords. "We are like Athena. We are wise." But the propaganda fails. It fails because it is untrue. You can write a poem where Diomedes wounds Ares, but you cannot remove Ares from the human heart. When the spear wall collapses, when the adrenaline floods the system, when the red mist descends, Athena vanishes. No one prays to the goddess of wisdom when they are fighting for their life in the mud. In that moment, the soldier belongs to Ares. The wound of Ares is symbolic of the wound in our own understanding of our nature. We try to stab the part of ourselves that is violent, to drive it away, to banish it to the sky. But a wounded god is a dangerous god. By denying Ares his dignity, by refusing to acknowledge the necessity of his chaotic force, the Greeks did not eliminate him. They made him darker. They pushed him into the subconscious. And notice the irony. Ares is healed. Paeon, the physician of the gods, spreads soothing herbs on the wound, and the flesh knits together instantly. Because you cannot kill war, you can only pretend to manage it. Ares returns to the feast. He sits down, but the silence around him is heavier than before. He knows now that he is alone. His father hates him. His sister Athena uses mortals to stab him. The poets mock him. He is the black sheep of the cosmic family. He carries the burden of the family's sins, the sins they commit but refuse to own. He is the scapegoat who is too strong to be driven into the desert. So where does he turn? Where does the god of hate go when he is rejected by the god of law, and the goddess of wisdom. He does not go to the training ground, he does not go to the armory. He goes to the only force in the universe that is as overwhelming, as irrational and as primal as he is. He goes to Aphrodite. The poets mock this too. They make dirty jokes about the affair between the war god and the love goddess. They call it a scandal, but look deeper. This is not just a tawdry affair. This is a metaphysical necessity. Why are war and love drawn together? Why do they inevitably find each other in the dark? It is the ancient principle of coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites. Ares is the force of separation, of tearing things apart, of entropy. Aphrodite is the force of connection, of bringing things together, of attraction. They are the two poles of the battery that powers the universe. If you only have Aphrodite, the world becomes a stagnant, suffocating unity. If you only have Ares, the world dissolves into dust. They need each other. The wound Diomedes inflicted was a wound of civilization attacking nature, but the healing comes from the union of the two greatest natural forces. As the humiliation of the Iliad fades, we move into a darker, more private chamber of the myth. The noise of the battlefield dies down, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic breathing of a different kind of struggle. The Greeks tried to shame Ares, but in doing so, they inadvertently set the stage for the creation of something beautiful. For when the god of war and the goddess of love collide, they do not just make noise, they make chemistry. They produce children who are not monsters, but mysteries. The net is being woven. Hephaestus, the smith, the husband of Aphrodite, is working in his forge. He knows what is happening. He is crafting a trap of invisible chains, finer than spiderwebs, harder than diamond. He plans to catch them in the act to expose them to the ridicule of the gods. But he does not realize that by binding them together, he is creating an icon that will outlast his own anger. The golden door is closing. The lovers are inside. The alchemy of harmony is about to begin. The noise of the battlefield has faded. The screams of the dying, the clash of bronze against ox-hide shields, the thunderous condemnation of Zeus, all of it drifts away like smoke in a strong wind. We are moving now into a space of intense quiet, a private chamber where the air is heavy with the scent of saffron and sweat. We are moving from the politics of Olympus to the physics of the universe. We have asked why the Greeks hated Ares, why they feared him, why they put him on trial. But now we must ask, who loved him and why? The answer brings us to the most scandalous and significant union in mythology, the affair between Ares and Aphrodite. On the surface, it is a soap opera. The beautiful, unfaithful wife of the crippled smith god Hephaestus sneaking away to sleep with the brutish, handsome war god. It is the story that the bard Demodocus sings in the Odyssey to entertain the Phaeacians. The gods laugh. It is a divine comedy. But if we stop laughing and look at the geometry of what is happening, we see something far profounder. We see the secret formula of existence. Consider the players. Aphrodite is not just the goddess of love in the romantic sense. She is mixes. She is the biological imperative to merge, to fuse, to bring separate things together into a new whole. She is the force of attraction that holds the atoms of the universe in place. Without her, everything is isolated, cold and inert. And Ares? As we have seen, he is the force of rupture. He is the blade that severs. He is the explosion that shatters the structure. He is entropy. In the logic of human morality, these two should be enemies. Creation versus destruction. But in the logic of the cosmos, they are the binary code of reality. You cannot have a universe with only one. If you have only Aphrodite, the world becomes a singular, suffocating mass, a static unity where nothing changes because nothing can be separated. If you have only Ares, the world dissolves into a fine dust of disconnected particles. So, they meet. They must meet. The text tells us they met in the house of Hephaestus while the smith was away at Lemnos. They sought the bed, they sought the union, but they were not alone. The sun, Helios, the great spy of the sky who sees all things, saw them. He reported the crime to Hephaestus, and here enters the third force, technology. Hephaestus is the god of the machine, of the forge, of the artifice. He is the logic that tries to bind nature. He does not fight Ares with a sword. He knows he would lose. He fights him with a device. He goes to his anvil and beats out a net. The chains are made of adamant, yet they are as fine as spiderwebs, invisible to the eye. He drapes this technological trap over the bedposts and waits. When the lovers return, when the forces of attraction and destruction embrace, the trap springs. The net falls. They are immobilized, bound together in the very act of union. Hephaestus calls the other gods to witness. "Father Zeus," he cries, "come and see these ridiculous, unbearable things." He wants to shame them. He wants the cosmos to mock the nakedness of war and love. And the gods do come. Poseidon, Hermes, Apollo. They stand in the doorway and they laugh. An unquenchable laughter rises among the immortals. But beneath the laughter there is a hesitation. Apollo nudges Hermes and asks, "Would you be willing to be pressed by such strong chains if you could sleep by the side of golden Aphrodite?" And Hermes, the truest speaker of them all, answers immediately, "I would suffer thrice the number of chains, and you gods could all look on if only I could sleep by her side." Hermes speaks the truth that the laughter tries to hide. The union of Ares and Aphrodite is worth the trap. It is the most potent state of being. And look at the image Hephaestus has inadvertently created. War and love, bound together so tightly by the unbreakable net that they cannot be told apart. They are fused. He wanted to punish them, but he has actually memorialized their necessity. He has created a static image of the dynamic tension that drives the world. And what is the fruit of this union? What is born when you mix the scream of battle with the whisper of desire? They have a daughter. Her name is Harmonia. This is the key to the entire mystery. Harmony. We tend to think of harmony as peace, as a lack of conflict, as a gentle drifting. But the Greek word harmonia comes from the verb harmazo, which means to fit together, to join, to fasten. It is a term used for carpentry, for masonry, for the rigging of ships. It implies a joining of things that do not naturally want to be joined. Musical harmony is the same. It is not one note. It is different notes, vibrating at different frequencies, held together in a mathematical tension. If the string is too loose, too much Aphrodite, there is no sound. If the string is too tight, too much Ares, it snaps. Harmony is the dangerous, perfect point in the middle where the tension creates beauty. The Greeks, in their deep wisdom, understood that you cannot have harmony without Ares. You cannot have structure without the opposing force that tests it. The universe is not a static painting. It is a burning fire, as Heraclitus would later say. War is the father of all and king of all. He meant that conflict, tension, and opposition are the engines of reality. Without Ares pushing against Aphrodite, nothing happens. Time stops, but the lineage does not end with Harmonia. The union produced other children, and their names are chilling. Phobos, panic, and Deimos, terror. How can the same parents produce harmony and terror? Because they are the same phenomenon viewed from different angles. When the tension of the universe is balanced, we call it harmony. When the tension overwhelms the individual mind, we call it panic. Ares brings both. He brings the destructive terror that shatters the mind, but through his union with love, he also provides the tension necessary for the music of existence. After the trap is lifted, after the debt is paid by Poseidon, the lovers are released. They go their separate ways, Ares to Thrace, Aphrodite to Cyprus. But the bond is never truly broken. They are the eternal couple. In the temples of Thebes they were worshipped together. The statues of Ares there did not show a raving monster, but a calm, bearded man, a partner, a father. This is the secret history of the god. He is the bad boy of the cosmos, yes, he is the dangerous element. But without him, the grand experiment of life fails. He acts as the great solvent. When a civilization becomes too rigid, too ossified, too stuck in its own laws, like the net of Hephaestus, Ares arrives. He smashes the structures, he burns the libraries, he topples the statues. It is horrific. It is a tragedy. But in that destruction, he releases the energy that Aphrodite needs to build something new. He is the forest fire that clears the dead wood so the green shoots can rise. We are nearing the end of the Greek cycle now. The sun is setting on the age of heroes. The brilliance of Athens is fading. The philosophers have tried to explain Ares away, the poets have tried to mock him, and the sculptors have tried to freeze him in marble. But he is shifting again. The Greek imagination, with its obsession with light and reason, could never fully embrace the darkness of Ares. They always kept him at arm's length. on the edge of the map in Thrace. But there is another people rising in the west, a people who do not care for the delicate balance of philosophy, a people of iron and earth and wolves. To them this god will not be a stranger. He will not be a hated son. He will be the father. He will be the absolute centre of their world. The mist is clearing over the 7 hills of a new city. The name of Ares is fading, dissolved in the mouth of a new language. The sound that rises now is heavier, deeper, more grounded. Mars. The wolf is waking up in the cornfield. The transformation is about to begin. The sun sets on the white marble of the Parthenon. The philosophical debates of the Athenians, the geometric perfection of their logic, and the poetic hatred of their war god, all of it begins to fade into the twilight of antiquity. We are leaving the fragmented, quarrelsome city-states of Greece behind. We are crossing the Ionian Sea, moving west, towards a peninsula shaped like a boot, towards a landscape of 7 hills, and a river that runs thick with yellow silt. Here, the frequency of history changes. The vibration lowers, becoming deeper, heavier, more rhythmic. We are entering the world of Rome, and here, the god we have been tracking, the screaming, chaotic, hated Ares, undergoes a transformation so total, so radical, that it borders on the miraculous. He sheds the skin of the Thracian butcher. He drops the baggage of the embarrassed outcast. He stands up. He grows taller. He becomes the father. The Romans did not worship Ares. They worshipped Mars. And while linguists might tell you the names are linked, the entities feel entirely different. To the Greeks, Ares was a nightmare to be contained. To the Romans, Mars was the bedrock of reality. He was Pater Mars, Father Mars. Why? Why did this pragmatic, engineering, empire-building civilization look at the god of bloodshed and see a patriarch? The answer lies in the soil. It lies in a mystery that modern people, disconnected from the food chain, find hard to understand. The profound connection between the sword and the plough. Walk with me into the fields of ancient Latium, before the empire, before the marble. This is a world of farmers, men who work the earth with their hands. In this world, there is a specific danger that lurks at the edge of the cultivated land. The blight, the rust, the storm, the wolf, the forces of wild nature that threaten to destroy the harvest. To protect the corn, you need a guardian who is more terrifying than the threat. You need a god who understands violence, who can stand on the boundary line, the limen, and bare his teeth at the chaos outside. This is Mars Silvanus, Mars of the woods, Mars of the wilds. In the oldest Latin prayers, preserved in the writings of Cato the Elder, the farmer does not ask Mars to destroy a city. He asks Mars to walk around the perimeter of the farm. The prayer is a ritual of containment. Father Mars, I pray and beseech thee that thou be gracious and merciful to me, my house and my household, that thou keep away, ward off, and remove sickness, seen and unseen, barrenness and destruction, ruin and unseasonable influence. This is the great revelation. Mars is not just the god of attack. He is the god of the immune system. He is the force that defines the boundary between us and them, between the order of the crop and the chaos of the weed. The Romans understood that civilization is a garden that must be constantly defended against the encroachment of the wild, and the only force strong enough to hold back the entropy of nature is the force of Mars. This is why the month of Mars, March, is the hinge of the year. It is the time when the winter breaks, the frost retreats, the earth softens. It is the time to bring out the plough, but it is also the time to bring out the shield. In the ancient calendar, the campaigning season and the growing season were identical. The Roman citizen was a soldier-farmer. He took up the sword to protect the field he had just ploughed. The two actions were spiritually the same, fighting back the death of the world. There is a biological truth here. Life eats life. Growth requires defense. By linking Mars to agriculture, the Romans acknowledged that the capacity for violence is not an aberration of human nature, but a prerequisite for survival. The wolf that circles the flock is an agent of Mars, yes. But the dog that kills the wolf is also an agent of Mars. And speaking of the wolf, we cannot ignore the she-wolf, Lupa, the animal that nursed Romulus and Remus, the twin founders of Rome. Who was their father? Mars. The myth tells us that the god of war descended upon Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, a keeper of the sacred fire. From this union of war and sacred fire came the twins who would build the eternal city. But Mars did not raise them. He left them to be suckled by a wolf. This is not an accident of the story, it is a statement of genetic coding. Rome claimed to have the milk of the wolf in its veins. They claimed to be the children of Mars raised by the wild. This justified their dominion. It justified their cruelty. How could they be judged by ordinary human standards? They were the brood of the war god. Unlike the Greeks, who kept Ares outside the walls, the Romans placed Mars in the very centre of their political life. In the heart of the Roman Forum, in the Regia, the house of the high priest, there were sacred spears kept in a dedicated chamber, the Hastae Martis. These were not weapons for use, they were seismographs of the divine will. The historians report that when a great war was coming, or when the state was in danger, the spears would vibrate on their own. They would shake without a hand touching them. Imagine the high priest entering that dark, quiet room, the air smelling of old stone and incense, and hearing the rattle of iron against stone, the vibration of the god, manifesting in the metal. It suggests that Mars was not a distant figure on a cloud, but a frequency running through the bedrock of the city, resonating with the coming tremors of history. The Romans also had the Salii, the leaping priests of Mars, 12 young patricians who would dress in archaic armour, bronze helmets and embroidered tunics, and dance through the streets in March and October, the months of opening and closing the war season. They would beat their shields with their swords, singing songs in a Latin so old that by the time of Augustus, even the Romans didn't fully understand what the words meant. They were beating the earth. They were waking up the god. They were waking up the soil for the corn and waking up the blood for the war. To the Roman mind, it was the same rhythm. Thump, 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 the heartbeat of the empire. This integration of Mars allowed Rome to conquer the known world. They did not suffer from the Greek guilt about violence. They did not see war as a breakdown of reason. They saw it as the supreme exercise of virtues, manliness, courage, excellence. Mars was not the god of the chaotic frenzy. He was the god of the disciplined legion. He was the god of the line that holds. But even in Rome, even with the title of father, there is a shadow. The wolf in the corn is a protector, yes, but he is still a wolf. The Romans harnessed the energy of Ares, they disciplined it. They gave it a uniform and a standard. They turned the screaming berserker into the silent, terrifying advance of the testudo formation. But energy cannot be created or destroyed, only changed. The madness of Ares did not disappear. It went inward. When you suppress the scream and turn it into a drill command, the pressure builds in the psyche. The Romans conquered the world, but they also lived in a state of perpetual anxiety. They were obsessed with omens, with boundaries, with the fear of the barbarian at the gate. They knew deep down that the Mars they worshipped was a volatile element. They knew that the peace of Rome was bought with a currency of absolute terror, and this brings us to the psychological dimension of the god. The Greeks gave Ares 2 sons, Phobos and Deimos, panic and terror. The Romans tried to hide these children behind the glorious eagles of the legions, but you cannot hide a feeling. You cannot legislate away the physiological reaction of the human body to the presence of death. As we leave the sunlit fields of the Italian harvest, as the golden age of the empire begins to rot from within, we must look at what happens when the god of war stops being a mythological figure and becomes a medical condition. We must look at the face of panic. We must enter the mind of the soldier when the discipline breaks, and the old red Greek madness comes flooding back in. The spears in the Regia are shaking. The wolf is howling in the Forum. The harvest is over and the winter is coming. The legions have marched into the dust. The golden eagles of Rome, once the symbol of order imposed upon the chaos, have rusted into the earth. We have seen the god of war as a Thracian outcast, a bound prisoner, a defendant in a murder trial, a lover caught in a net, and a father of the harvest. But all of these are masks. They are attempts by the human mind to dress a terrifying reality in clothes that we can understand. When the armour is stripped away, when the political justifications for war evaporate, and when the history books burn, what remains? What remains is a feeling, a vibration in the nervous system, a sudden catastrophic failure of the rational mind. We must look now at the shadows that walk behind Ares. The Greeks, in their unflinching accuracy, gave them names, Phobos and Deimos. We translate these words as panic and terror, but in the modern world we use them lightly. We say we are panicked when we lose our keys. We say we are terrified of a deadline. But to the ancients, Phobos and Deimos were not metaphors. They were demons. They were autonomous forces that descended from the sky and possessed the bodies of men. Consider the shield of Heracles. This is an ancient text, a fragment of poetry often attributed to Hesiod, that describes the shield of the greatest hero. It does not depict a peaceful city or a harvest. It depicts the face of Phobos. The description is hallucinatory. It speaks of a face with eyes that glow with fire, a mouth full of white teeth, cruel and arrayed in rose, and above all a look of backward-glancing fear. That detail is the key. Backward-glancing. It is the posture of the prey. It is the posture of the man who knows something is hunting him. Phobos is not the courage of the fight. Phobos is the impulse to run. He is the override switch in the reptilian brain that screams, "Flee." Deimos' brother is the terror, the freezing, the paralysis, the dread that turns the limbs to lead before the blow even lands. Why are these the sons of Ares? Because Ares is not just the god of the killer, he is the god of the victim. He is the totality of the violent experience. He encompasses the strike of the sword and the scream of the wound. He is the connection between the predator and the prey. In the heat of the melee, the distinction between the two blurs. The killer is terrified of dying. The victim fights with a panic-fueled strength. They are united in the same high-frequency vibration. This brings us to a disturbing theory about the nature of the war god. What if Ares is not a person? What if he is a frequency? Ancient medical texts and historical accounts of battle often describe a phenomenon where soldiers change. The Greeks called it lyssa, wolfish rage. It is a state of mind where the soldier ceases to be human. The vision tunnels. The hearing dampens, filtering out everything except the sound of the threat. Time dilates. Seconds stretch into hours, or hours compress into seconds. Pain is suppressed. The moral centre of the brain, the part that says thou shalt not kill, shuts down completely. To the ancient observer, this looked like possession. It looked like a god entering the meat of the man. And who was that god? Ares. When the hoplite line broke, when the discipline shattered and the rout began, it was said that Phobos had taken the field. Panic was viewed as a contagion. It jumped from man to man like a virus. One man turns to run, and suddenly 1,000 men are running, even though they are not yet beaten. They have been infected by the god. We like to think we have evolved past this. We have satellite imagery, drone warfare, and rules of engagement. We treat combat stress reaction, or PTSD, as a clinical disorder, a malfunction of chemistry. But the symptoms are exactly the same as they were on the plains of Troy. The shaking hands, the night terrors, the hypervigilance, the backward glancing of Phobos. Perhaps the ancients were not superstitious. Perhaps they were just using a different vocabulary for a physiological reality. When they said, Ares is in him, they were describing a biological shift where the sympathetic nervous system is hijacked by the survival instinct. The god of war is encoded in our DNA. He is the dormant program in the amygdala, waiting for the trigger code to be entered. And this is the tragedy of the god. He is inescapable. You can banish him from the city. You can ridicule him in plays. You can preach peace from the pulpits. But as long as the human body is wired for survival, Ares is waiting. He is the ghost in the machine. There is a strange silence in the historical record about what happens to the soldiers after the war. We hear about the victory parades, the triumphs of the generals. But we rarely hear about the men who came back from the campaigns of Alexander or the survivors of Cannae. Yet the literature gives us hints. The story of Orestes pursued by the Furies, hearing their screaming in his head long after the deed is done. The story of Ajax, the great warrior who goes mad and slaughters a flock of sheep, thinking they are enemies. These are not just stories of madness. They are case studies of the possession failing to lift. The war ends, but the god does not leave. Ares moves into the house. He sits at the dinner table. He wakes the soldier in the middle of the night. The 13 months in the bronze jar becomes the internal reality of the veteran, trapped in a dark, resonant space with a monster that cannot die. It suggests that the energy of Ares is radioactive. It has a half-life. You cannot simply turn it off. Once you have invited Phobos and Deimos into your mind to survive the battlefield, they claim squatters' rights. As we approach the end of our journey, the question shifts. We have looked at the past, at the myths of origin and the structures of empire. But what of the future? The temples of Ares are ruins now. The statues of Mars are in museums, stared at by tourists who do not know the prayers. We think the age of the gods is over, but is it? If Ares is a psychological state, a biological imperative, and a force of entropy, then he does not need a temple. He does not need a name. He only needs a host. And looking at the world around us, at the rising tension, at the digitized anger, at the speed with which we dehumanize one another, it seems the god is not dead. He has just gone underground. He has become a signal in the cables. He has become a ghost in the algorithm. The jar was opened long ago, the net was cut, the wolf was fed, and now we stand at the edge of the final mystery. Why do civilizations rise only to fall? Why does the cycle repeat over and over, the building up of walls and the tearing down of walls? Is it possible that Ares is not the enemy of civilization, but its inevitable conclusion? Is he the great filter that waits at the end of every story? The noise of Phobos is deafening if you know how to listen. But beyond the panic, there is a deeper silence waiting, the silence of the end, the silence of the filter. Let us take one last step into the dark to see what lies on the other side of the war. The fire has burned down to the embers, the stories have been told. We have walked the perimeter of the Thracian wilds, stood in the mud of the darker ages, listened to the gavel of the first trial, and felt the vibration of the Roman earth. We have dissected the god of war, stripping away the poetry and the politics to find the raw nerve beneath. And now we are left with the silence. But it is not the empty silence of a vacuum. It is the heavy, loaded silence of a room where a clock has just stopped ticking. There is a concept in modern astrophysics known as the Great Filter. It is a theory used to explain the silence of the universe. It asks, if life is abundant, why do we hear no signals? Why are the stars quiet? The theory suggests that there is a hurdle, a barrier, a trap that every civilization hits as it advances, a point where the technology of destruction outpaces the wisdom of control, a point where the species becomes smart enough to build the fire, but not disciplined enough to keep from burning down the house. What if Ares is the name the ancients gave to this filter? We look back at the history of the Greek world, and we see it punctuated by collapses. The Bronze Age ended not with a whimper, but with a cataclysm. Palaces burned. Writing was forgotten. The population plummeted. The age of heroes did not end in glory. It ended in the dark. The myth of the Trojan War, which features Ares so prominently, is essentially the story of a civilization committing suicide over a breach of hospitality. It is a story of total, mutually assured destruction. The Greeks, in their melancholy wisdom, understood that Ares was not just a god of war in the sense of battles and borders. He was the god of the reset button. He was the force of entropy that accelerates when a society becomes too complex, too arrogant, too detached from the soil. The 13 months in the jar was a reprieve, a temporary suspension of the law of decay. But the jar always opens, the entropy always returns. We often comfort ourselves with the idea of progress. We believe we are climbing a ladder, moving away from the blood-soaked mud of the past, moving towards a future of reason and light. We think we have left Ares behind in the museums, a marble curiosity with a broken nose. But the story we have traced suggests a different geometry. Time is not a ladder, it is a wheel, and the wheel is turning. Consider the silence of the oracles. In the 1st century AD, the historian Plutarch recounted a strange story. A ship sailing near the island of Paxi heard a voice calling from the shore, instructing the pilot to shout a message to the mainland. The great Pan is dead. It marked the end of an era, the death of the nature gods, the retreat of the divine into the shadows. But there was no voice announcing the death of Ares. No sailor ever heard a cry across the water saying the god of war had died. Why? Because he cannot die. You cannot kill a fundamental law of physics. As long as there is difference, there is friction. As long as there is friction, there is heat. And as long as there is heat, there is the potential for fire. Ares has simply changed his state of matter. He has sublimated. He is no longer the man in the bronze armor screaming on the plains of Troy. He has become the invisible stress fracture in the steel beam. He has become the tension in the negotiation room. He has become the quiet, humming logic of the nuclear silo. He is waiting. The myth of the dragon's teeth is perhaps the most prophetic of all. Cadmus sowed the teeth, and the warriors sprang up. We are the heirs of that harvest. We have built our cities on the same soil. We have expanded our reach, mapped the globe, split the atom, and decoded the genome. We have become giants like the Elodie who tried to storm heaven. We are piling mountain upon mountain, data upon data, weapon upon weapon, trying to reach the sky. But the lesson of the myth is that the sown men eventually turn on each other. It is their nature. It is the code written in the seed. The question that hangs over us, in the quiet of the night, is whether we can rewrite that code. Can we break the cycle? Or are we destined to act out the same tragedy on a grander scale that played out before the walls of Thebes? Ares does not care. That is the terrifying truth we must confront. He is not evil. He is not malicious. He is inevitable. He is the forest fire that burns the dead wood. If the forest is healthy, the fire is small. If the forest is choked with debris, with lies, with unresolved grievances and stagnant structures, the fire is total. He is the audit of reality. He tests the structures we build. If they are sound, they stand. If they are weak, if they are built on illusions, he tears them down. So where does that leave us? It leaves us on the threshold, just like the god himself. We are standing between the city and the wild, between the logic of Athena and the madness of Ares. We realize now that the stranger was never really a stranger. He was the shadow we cast. He was the heartbeat we tried to ignore. The script ends, but the story continues. The sun will rise tomorrow and the world will look the same. The traffic will flow, the markets will open, the screens will light up. But perhaps, beneath the noise of the modern world, you will hear it. A faint vibration in the ground. A rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat, or like the butt of a spear hitting the earth. It is the sound of the old god shifting in his sleep. Or perhaps he is already awake and he is just watching, waiting to see if we have learned anything from the jar, from the net, and from the teeth. The mist closes in again. The landscape of history fades back into the grey. We are alone in the dark. The final question is not about the god, it is about us. When the drum begins to beat, when the adrenaline spikes, when the veneer of civilization cracks, whose face will we see in the mirror? Sleep well. The wolf is at the door, but for tonight the door is locked.